I mean, globally, I'm no phenomenon, but my approach is a little unorthodox. Hi, my name is Dick Kid, and I'm here to save the world. I was rewatching your episode on Rogan, and some of the things you guys talked about were super fascinating. Just because I remember that was when I heard I hadn't seen your MDMA film, and when I watched that after I watched the Rogan podcast, I watched your MDMA documentary, and it was fascinating. Like, have you found that to be effective?
Effective, not a cure, but effective. I mean, when I started doing therapy for PTSD, I realized I had two things that were going to get in the way. Like, I'm a man and I'm English.
Yeah.
So anything that could get me to like smash through those walls was going to be helpful. And MDMA just did that in no time, in a really remarkable way, and just allowed me to think about things and put things together and accept things that I don't think I would have accepted normally. The tricky part has been taking the lessons from those MDMA sessions and keeping them in and keeping them, when I first had those thoughts in the MDMA therapy, it was like a revelation to me, and I thought, okay,
Yeah.
this is now how I think, and that's weakened slightly as time has passed since the MDMA therapy. So trying to keep it instilled in you has been difficult, but still, the therapy was unbelievably helpful.
See, that's fascinating, and the documentary was very fascinating, but it was really. Oh, sorry. Wait, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, cool, okay. Yeah, it was just really fascinating when you were talking about, especially, kind of your upbringing, saying how, like I don't know, and I don't know if this maybe like is this an English, structural family thing where crying is not as accepted growing up, or is that
Yeah, very English, probably very British thing,
okay?
very male thing as well. I
For
mean,
sure,
it's,
definitely a male thing.
you know,
Yes.
yeah. Um, but yeah, I think it's just, I mean, people say stiff upper lip as if, during the Blitz, people would go out drinking and going to concerts and having sing-alongs around the piano. They make it sound like a cheery thing, but stiff upper lip is actually this serious pressure to be tough and just to never admit that you need help or you're feeling weak or vulnerable, never to reach out for help. And whatever the problem is, no matter how you're feeling, you just charge through and somehow get on with it and work. It's actually much darker than I think most people think of when they hear that phrase, stiff upper lip. And I think in terms of dealing with things like PTSD or depression, I think it can be, very dangerous because I heard the voice in my head. I don't know if it's an imaginary voice or if it was grandparents or people I've known, but just there's nothing wrong with you. Just get on with it. Just get up and get to work and stop thinking about this crap. That voice was in my head all the time, even when I was doing the MDMA.
Yeah, like that is definitely the lie that society has perpetuated of like quote unquote healthy masculinity. Like the way that human males are supposed to behave is just push through and kind of push through until you can't deal with your emotions anymore and kind of put on this sort of front. Actually, it's interesting because I talk a lot about on this podcast a lot about hip hop, and you definitely see that in the hip hop world of there's a lot of vulnerability within the music, but then once the microphone is turned off, there's a front of sort of this hard, tough front that's being portrayed. And I mean, it's a very male thing in general, not just British, I'm sure. Definitely.
It's interesting. I was talking to a very close friend of mine here in Brooklyn, Rosie Perez, who wrote an amazing book about her life story and has struggled with PTSD and other things her whole
Oh,
life. And
wow.
we're both huge boxing fans. And she talked about a couple of boxers she knows personally. I mean, we talked about Mike Tyson as well. Mike Tyson is the heavyweight champion of the world. You can still see this bullied child in him often, very often. I mean,
Yes.
now he's open to, smoking weed and doing all this stuff. But even when he was at the absolute top of the world as world heavyweight champion, you could still see this wounded, vulnerable, small, bullied child in him, even when he's, knocking out,
Yeah.
220-pound, world-class athletes every few months.
Well, see, that's also very fascinating because do you watch his podcast, Hot Boxing with Mike Tyson?
I've seen bits here and there.
Okay. Well, it's really fascinating because he's at a really interesting point of life where he's very and I don't know what the reasoning behind it is completely, but he's very reflective of, he reminisces a lot about his growing up. He had a very tough upbringing of, his mom introduced him to cocaine at 6 years old, and he had a very tough upbringing. And but he kind of go walks through in the podcast this trauma that he encountered as a young age and how it came out even within the boxing arena. And that's really fascinating, too. And it's also fascinating too because he's very there's a sort of humility about him now. I feel like that which we probably didn't see. I mean, I'm only 23, so when he was at his peak, I was, just being born or not even born yet. So, but it is interesting to kind of see that correlation of him now and him who he was. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Oh, and I mean, other like famously tough guys, veterans. Like obviously, I've got lots of friends now who are veterans, and I mean, I don't know what the stats are in the US, but in the UK, it takes decades for veterans with PTSD to reach out for help. And in those decades, they may have lost a marriage, they may have become homeless, they may have become alcoholics, they may have done time in prison.
Mm,
That they'll go through all of that before they finally admit, okay, there's a problem here, and I need to actually reach out for help because it's so hard for them to reach out for help. And I've got a couple of friends who are veterans who definitely have PTSD, and I'm
yeah.
trying so hard to get them just to go and see a therapist and just do 1 hour, just sit down for 1 hour. I'm saying, listen, if you had a bad knee or a bad back, you'd go and see a specialist
Yeah.
and they'd help you out and they'd tell you what you need to do. Why is it so different for your brain or for your psychology? And even getting them to go for that first hour is incredibly difficult to do.
Well, it's fascinating that I've seen you talk about in the past, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong. Um, you sort of start out your career very curious, very ambitious about the world, and then when you start experiencing these traumatic events all over the world, there's a sort of numbness that debilitates that curiosity when you come back, and pleasurable things that are meant to be enjoyable, like going out to eat,
Yeah,
hanging out with
yeah.
friends, are less so enjoyable. Is that something that you personally experience? And also too, I was
No,
curious. Oh, sorry. Sorry, you go actually.
that's absolutely correct. And I think that's when I knew there was something up. Is when I started out in my career, you could have said to me, do you want to go to the most luxurious villa in Barbados for a month, or do you want to go to Gaza for a month?
Mhm.
And I would have chosen Gaza in a second. I would have paid to go to Gaza for a month because I was so curious. And the curiosity, it does take endurance. It does take a bit of bravery. But if you're curious, that overrides everything else. That overrides your fear, your tiredness, because you just want to see everything and record everything and witness everything. And at some point that went. And at some point, I'm guessing about 5 years ago, very roughly, I don't really know when, it got to the point where just getting on a plane, the 2 or 3 days before I got on a plane to go somewhere, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, I lost my appetite, and it was more like, what's going to happen this time? Is this the trip where you lose your legs? Is this the trip where you get shot? Is this the trip where you get kidnapped? And that's what I was thinking. Just please get through this in one piece and do a good job and come back with a good feel. And that curiosity somehow had been lost. And it's exactly what you say. It's the numbness, which in very dangerous situations is handy
Yeah.
because you need to not be paralyzed with fear. You need to know what to do, where to run, where to hide, who to grab. But prolonged exposure to that means that you just become numb all the time. And when I was away in tough places, I used to sort of mentally do a list of things I wanted to do when I got home.
Mm.
Food I wanted to eat, people I wanted to see, films I wanted to see, and more and more I got home and went to do those things, and it was either an massive anticlimax or I just didn't care to even do them. And you'd come home and just think, what am I doing? What was this for? Um, and that's when I realized there was a problem. And then a couple of people close to me said, "Look, Ben, you're not right. Something's clearly wrong." And that led me to actually go and see someone. And within 10 minutes, they said, "You clearly have PTSD. There's no doubt about it."
Well, looking at the sequence of events at your life, it feels like from an outsider's perspective, if someone were to look at your career, they might say, and you kind of mentioned this on Rogan too, like they might say, "Oh, he's an adrenaline junkie," but in reality, you said that every time you're sort of in these crisis scenarios, it's an endurance test. every time that you're doing it, and then every time you say, you know, "Oh, I'm not gonna do this again," but then you find yourself coming back to these trips continually. How does that cycle kind of continue to go? Like, you say, "Okay, I'm not gonna do this," but then you're kind of drawn back into to do it again. Like, what's the motivation to go back after, you've witnessed such horrific events?
I mean, the first thing, absolutely. People who say you're an adrenaline junkie or it's a thrill to do this for a living, I have no idea what they're talking about. I have no
Right.
idea what their experience is where they think it's I mean, I've heard some people say that getting shot at is exciting. I mean, maybe once if a bullet rings out and you run and there's a bit of maybe, but prolonged exposure to that and prolonged exposure to just seeing people suffer in ways that even when you're seeing it with your own eyes are hard to fathom, and seeing human cruelty on a level that really is hard to fathom, even if you're witnessing it for months on end. That's not thrilling or exciting. There
Mm.
sometimes can be a slight thrill when you think you've captured really important footage that might have some kind of impact. But I hate to sound too negative, but so many times that footage actually doesn't have much impact. And there might be a bit of a buzz on social media for a day or two, but I mean, especially today, who's the capital of Helmand province, where the US and the UK sent most of their resources in Afghanistan, is currently surrounded by the Taliban, and they may take the capital of Helmand province. Um, all of that fighting for I mean, officially 20 years, there's actually less than that in the south of Afghanistan, but all of that fighting may have been for nothing. And the civilians and our allies in Lashkar may soon be living under the Taliban rule, and right now are fleeing their homes and terrified for their lives and their families. And I haven't seen it in the news anywhere at all.
Yeah.
So that means that even the thrill of capturing what you think is really important footage is reduced to nil very easily. And then to your other question about a few times I've said to myself, you've done enough, quit, don't do it again. Most of the time, I think this is the most somewhat useful thing you can
Mhm.
do with your life. If I had something else that felt more useful, I would be doing it. This is something that I think I'm pretty good at and is somewhat useful. You hope that
Yeah.
raising awareness on these issues will somehow lead to some kind of help at some point in the future. So I don't know if I get sucked back in. I think it's more that me saying I've had enough and I don't want to do this anymore. It's okay, I can hear you. I just can't see you. I can
Oh,
see you
yeah, yeah.
again now.
Can you see me? Sorry about that. Yeah, pause. Sorry, can you go back to what you were saying about you don't think you get sucked back in, but
Yeah, so I don't think I get sucked back in. I just think that on the occasions when I've talked about quitting, it's been kind of half-hearted, because even towards the end of the first MDMA session, and I thought the MDMA therapy might actually make me quit. I
mhm,
thought the MDMA might finally make me admit that I've done enough and I'm not 100% anymore and I should stop doing this, at least for the time being. But
right.
even towards the end of that first MDMA session, I was having ideas about future documentaries and future stories and how to cover them. So I think this is really where my heart is, and I think this is what I really care most about. I just think maybe I need to do it a bit smarter, because in the past my instinct was always, where is the worst possible place to be? Where's the most violent, horrific place to be? Get there and spend as much time there as possible.
Yeah.
And I think I can speak for most of us who do this. When most of us, not all of us, most of us aren't interested in guys shooting guns because everyone knows what that looks like. Who cares? We're interested in the impact of war on civilians.
Yeah.
And I think there are ways of showing that without being at the sharpest possible end every single time you go.
Yeah, well, I think that
So,
your
so
I do think that your work is it really is inspiring a lot of people. And it's not only inspiring a lot of people, but I do think that um and of course I'm sure it comes with this kind of work. But anyway, sorry, can you still hear me?
yeah,
Oh, cool. Okay. Um, but yeah, I really do think that it's a kind of an interesting point of, like we're sort of I mean, I'm sort of starting out my career right now, and I think I'm definitely in that mindset of like, you know, I want to um like that I don't know, I guess my curiosity is an all-time high, and I'm kind of that mindset of like I want to be exposed to as much of that as possible, but then I don't necessarily think through the consequences of what that could entail. Um, But sorry, I wanted to go back to your point of, when you're talking about like a lot of these major world events, they're not being documented that much. Like this, I guess the war on Syria has been documented a good bit. You've done some good stuff on Yemen, but why do you think in the Western world, why are people not talking about, for example, like something going on in Burkina Faso with the refugees? Like why is that not being talked about more? What is it, because we're so
I mean,
numb
I
to
don't think it's
that?
just
Or
I don't think it's just the Western world. I think it's particularly America. I mean,
yeah,
if you
America.
look
Yeah.
at European news networks, Canadian networks, there's internet lots of international coverage very often.
Okay.
It really is worse in America. And when I first moved here, I'd say that 95% of the news coverage was domestic politics or domestic issues.
Yeah.
Now it's close to 100%, and it's not even particularly good coverage. I mean, it's Trump's tweets and who might get fired next and who is the inside. It's gossip. It's not. I mean, how many times have you seen a really detailed expose of what Trump has done to the EPA, for example?
Yeah.
Um, I've seen, there are people like ProPublica doing an amazing job of things like that. I don't know how widely read ProPublica is. In terms of the mainstream news, unless it's the blast in Lebanon, unless it's a missing plane, there's almost no coverage at all of what happens in the rest of the world. I wish I knew why it was. I mean, I think here you've got a unique problem in that news is entertainment and it's a business,
Yeah.
and it's ratings and advertising revenue driven. So, Jeff Zucker makes the decision on CNN to show a live feed of the podium that Trump will speak at soon with a countdown. And we show the plane landing and him walking up to the podium. It's madness, but their advertising revenue quadrupled.
Yeah.
So then it's a business bottom line decision. I mean, lots of people can criticize the BBC in various ways, but they have a mandate to cover public interest stories, and certainly the rest of the world. I mean, I think BBC television has slipped a lot over the last few years, but BBC radio is fantastic. And
Yeah.
you could listen to any one of their news programs once a week and have a really good sense of what's important and what's happening around the world. Why it's not like that in America, I don't know, but possibly it's American exceptionalism where they just think the rest of the world is full of shithole countries, to quote Trump, and they're always going to be shithole countries. So who cares? What
Yeah.
can we do about it? I don't know. I keep on hoping that one of these films about Yemen or Afghanistan or whatever is going to break through and have some sort of impact. But very rarely does that happen. Very rarely.
Well, I think there's this lingering sense in America of post-colonization, like patriotism that is always being, I mean, it's definitely being shoved down your throats by like far right-wing organizations. But it is it's a real shame that not a lot of Americans are um at least consuming your media too, because I think a lot of people could benefit. I mean, obviously there is a good bit, but I think that a lot of people could benefit from the knowledge that you're bringing them. I was curious, what does it do to you as a journalist? Because you're in some hard situations, like some really hard situations. What does it do to you? And you mentioned this a little bit on Rogan, like when a journalist is staying in Beirut and they're supposedly covering ISIS, but you're actually in on the field and like in a territory. What does that do to you, like when you're seeing other journalists that are they're sort of living it up in a way, and you're
Yeah.
really risking your life for the information?
I mean, I should qualify. There are wherever I go, there are normally several writers or photographers who are doing it exactly right, and often getting paid almost nothing. I mean, struggling to even break even. It's the very highly paid TV anchors and news crews who are the ones who are. It's often sickening because they just get enough to have the shot of the flak jacket and the frown and
Yeah. Yeah.
and something vaguely Middle Easty in the background, like some palm trees, or ideally like a destroyed building or something,
Yeah.
and that's it. And it's completely upside down. I mean, in my mind, the writers and photographers who spend months in these places should be getting paid very well. and the guys on TV with makeup and tailored suits should be getting far less, and the
Yeah.
photographers and writers should be very well known, and the TV anchors much less so. It's completely upside down. Um,
Well, you said
but
some of
I,
these
I
guys are making, it's hard to make ends meet, and they're really in the grit and the grime, and they're they're barely making ends meet, and then these other, famous news anchors are, barely getting in, in the conflict, and they're, making millions and millions of dollars.
millions, tens of millions of sometimes. I mean, at the BBC, I remember it. I don't know if this was ever like a written agreement, but it seemed to be you do a couple of years of frontline reporting around the world, and then when you get into your late 40s, 50s, you get a cushy job behind a desk reading the news, and
Yeah.
you get paid £500,000 a year, let's say, which to us was an astoundingly high salary, like ludicrously high salary. That's nothing compared to some of these guys here. I mean, there are guys here who spend a day or two abroad to get that shot for the trailer, and apart from
Yeah.
that, they spend 99% of their time behind the glass desk, and they're on like 10, $15 million a year. It's obscene.
Yeah. I feel like watching more of your stuff also, it makes me question a lot of, you know, ethical perspectives on foreign policy. Like, you've talked a little bit about, the Clinton administration's failure to intervene in the Rwandan genocide. That was looked down as probably, like you mentioned, probably the biggest failure of that administration. But then there's also the opposite spectrum of that, where, you know, um, the war in Iraq, and so it's kind of, it's very complicated. And then there's also like a middle ground of like a neutrality of like, you know do you just not do it, like, do you just not, pretend like you don't know what's going on, you know what I mean? Like, so it's so
Yeah.
complex, like.
So I mean, Rwanda, 800,000 people were killed, and a lot of people will tell you, actually there's a real debate, but we didn't attempt to intervene at all. And then more recently, as a result of the failures in Iraq and Afghanistan, we didn't intervene seriously in Syria. I mean, we had special forces training some of the rebels and so on, but it wasn't a full scale invasion. It wasn't even a no fly zone like Iraq or Afghanistan. And I think that's just because there wasn't the political will or the public will to intervene, because there is now, as a result of Iraq and Afghanistan, the feeling that even if we go in somewhere with hundreds of billions of dollars worth of technology and hardware, and even if we go in with good intentions, um, you could probably make that case for Afghanistan far more than Iraq. But it doesn't matter. We're not going to succeed. There's nothing we can do. And then on the more sort of America first scale of things, you've got the attitude of they're always going to kill each other. They're not as civilized as we are. There's nothing
Yeah.
we can do about it. So why should we even bother trying? And Syria now, I mean, no one knows how many people have been killed in Syria. The vast majority by the Assad regime, not by the awful terrorist groups who are operating there. But there are certainly reasonable estimates that more people have been killed in Syria than were killed in Rwanda. So possibly 1 million people at this stage. And like I said, there wasn't even a no-fly zone.
Didn't you mention something about, and I can't remember what it was. It was some sort of misconception of the White Helmets, like that they were, was it that some people thought that they were like a terrorist organization or something? Do you remember you mentioned that?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I wish I knew exactly the where it comes from. I mean, there are some people who claim that the White Helmets are actors, and when they run into bombed out buildings and pull kids out of the rubble, the kids are actors as well. And it's all
Mm.
a foreign backed plot to make Assad look bad and push for regime change. I mean, it makes no sense to me whatsoever, because there are thousands of hours of footage of these guys running in and rescuing people.
Yeah.
And even if you assume that the White Helmets are actors and the people they're pulling out of the rubble are actors, what about the rubble?
Yeah.
Are they claiming that there's some studio set somewhere where they're literally bombing entire neighborhoods to rubble, and then these actors are coming in, and it's absurd. And there are people who will find one photograph where someone who appears to be badly injured, allegedly the same day or a day later, appears to be fine,
Yeah.
or a member of the White Helmets appears posing alongside one of the awful terrorist groups, which may well have happened. they do operate in the areas where these groups operate because they're the areas that are being bombed by Assad, of course, and Russia and Iran. But the idea that they're actors and this is all some kind of conspiracy to promote regime change is just crazy.
Yeah, I was pretty disappointed in February when so I'm also big, I'm getting into it more recently, but my fiance really is more into it. But um she was kind of getting me into like just like, like a film and that kind of thing. And so but I was really disappointed. I may have mentioned this to you on the phone when we talked. I think I did actually. But I was very disappointed when American Factory won the Oscar over for Sama. Did you see For Sama at all?
Yeah, I mean, this seems to happen every year. Every year they nominate one. I think that year it was two. Was it Father and Sons? I think was the other film that was nominated as well.
I
Um,
can't remember. It was
yeah, but two.
yeah, I think you're right actually.
They nominate one or two really good foreign films like that, and
Yeah.
they rarely, if ever, seem to win. I mean, I actually thought American Factory was a great documentary, but I would have loved to have seen Fosama win that. I mean, that was
Yeah.
Fosama was a once in a lifetime documentary. I mean, that was just incredible.
I mean, that was because it started from the beginning of their lives in 2016 and before 2016 actually, and then basically up until now, but which was it was fascinating. I again I liked American Factory too. I thought it was well done as well, but
I just watched the James Foley documentary a few nights ago as well. I've been putting off watching it for years because I knew it'd be a difficult watch. I actually met his mother and father once very briefly, but that's a really good film as well and really worth watching.
wait, is that the one? Is that on HBO?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that about
I
the
think it's
that
called Jim, but it's the James Foley story.
Yes, I watched that. Is that with that's the journalist who was captured by ISIS?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Man, I'm sorry. Did you that was probably a hard film to process for you. Was that how was that watching it and kind of thinking about it
yeah.
afterwards?
I mean, my first thought was just imagine his. I mean, you see how much pain it caused them, but you imagine, I tend not to think of myself, my own well-being on these trips because I kind of think, so what if I have to rough it for a month or two here and there? Like so what? There are people who are stuck there and don't have any way out. But just seeing the effect that his murder had on his family was a really tough watch because I've imagined that for my own family so many times. And suddenly, then it starts to feel a bit selfish if you're potentially putting other people through that.
But it seems like and correct me if I'm wrong too. You kind of talked about or you've talked about in the past too sort of downplaying your own importance while you're there. And I mean, and I remember you mentioned on the phone too, like, you said, the real heroes are these people living in these crisis situations. Um, but at the same time too, you kind of were downplaying your own importance and, kind of questioning, over years of doing it, you were saying, is this really having an effect? Am I really raising as much awareness as I, thought I was going to be when I started? Can you walk me through some of those thoughts, like now after the MDMA therapy and kind of planning to continue your career? Like, do you still think that, or is there sort of been a mindset change?
Um, I mean, the Jim Foley documentary is good because I love what he said about the importance of journalism, and I think the way I try and look at it now is it's slightly egotistical to think that you alone can change the world or change situations around the world, but
Sure.
but but collectively as a team, even though some of us are rivals or some of us don't know each other, as a team, you know, maybe Syria would be worse, even worse, if none of us covered it. I don't actually know that's true because I think Assad and Russia and Iran and others would have done exactly what they've done anyway. But maybe situations around the world would be worse if we didn't cover it at all. And maybe one day Assad will be brought to justice because there is so much evidence. I mean, mountains of evidence of the war crimes he's committed. So
Oh
so
yeah.
that makes it feel like it's somewhat worthwhile. But also, I mean, one of the first bits of advice I ever got when I started doing this was from a photographer who was I'm sure not well paid at all, but she just said to me, Ben, no matter how broke you are, no matter how little you get paid for these trips, when you come back, give yourself 3 or 4 days somewhere beautiful and peaceful, and just treat yourself. That's as important as your camera and your notepad. And I remember thinking that's probably great advice, which I didn't take ever. I mean,
Didn't you
a
spend some
couple
time
of
in?
times on.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, didn't you spend some time in Jamaica?
Yeah, so I've been on vacation 2 or 3 times to Jamaica for, I think, 6 days is the longest. But she actually meant literally on the way home. Just have 2 or 3 days to decompress and just switch off, and then you can expect to get back into normal life and enjoy friends and family. And
Yeah.
I think that was fantastic advice, and I never took it, and I wish that maybe I had. But it's very hard to think of yourself and to treat yourself and to look after yourself when, as I said, that you're just leaving people who've got it so much worse than you would ever have on your worst ever day.
Have you found yourself, because I think I've found myself doing this, especially when quarantine hit, was so I tend to be very extroverted. I love talking with people. I love hanging out with people. But sometimes I can pursue that to the extent of ignoring, putting things off that I'm dealing with and kind of consume my life with being busy and hanging out with people so that I don't have to process events that have, maybe traumatic events that have happened in my past. Did you find, and I found myself in quarantine reflecting more than I ever have been on, things that had happened. Did you find yourself kind of processing those thoughts and thinking back on memories that you've had being in these situations, and just like kind of things coming back to you that you hadn't really thought about before?
Yeah, and forcing myself to walk 10,000 steps a day. I keep on trying to meditate, and I'm just not making much progress with it. But I keep on trying to do that, and I've started to do that thing that we accuse kids of doing all the time, where I'll watch the town halls last night, for example, and then I'll pick up my phone to see what people are saying about the town halls on Twitter.
Mhm.
And at no point do you allow yourself the time to decide what you think about what you've just seen. And actually, you don't even allow yourself much time to think at all. It's always stimulation from other people. And I was talking to someone the other day who's had some real problems in his life and has bought a place way out on Shelter Island in New York.
Oh, wow.
And he just leaves his phone in Manhattan, and he goes out there, and has no distractions whatsoever, no interruptions whatsoever. And he said for the first few days it was really difficult, but once you
Mm.
get used to it, it's incredible. And to be able to actually think your own thoughts, and I mean, he goes for long walks, and it just gets complete peace and quiet. And there's a few things like that have happened over the last year or so where my body is just like telling me that this is a really healthy, important thing to do. Just get into nature. I was interviewed by a neuroscientist, I think it was 2 years ago now, about PTSD, and he said, Ben, for a 2 week walk in nature, no phone, no words, not even a book, no commercials, not even any straight lines of buildings, not even any right angles or concrete. Just go for a
Mhm.
2 week walk in nature, and it will literally rewire your brain. And I've been thinking about it ever since, and wanting to do it ever since, and haven't done it yet, but I'm hoping to do it fairly soon.
Well, so yeah, it's so interesting because we're so attached, especially my generation and myself definitely included, is you checking my phone, that dopamine going to my brain. I'm so used to it. I'm so, if I don't know what I'm doing with my hands, I go straight for my phone. And, I think it was probably really hard for a lot of African Americans in this country, especially during everything. You're in quarantine and you're just seeing continual police brutality. You're seeing um, traumatic events that are triggering you over and over again. And
And you're hearing white Americans denying it and saying it doesn't
yes,
exist,
yes,
or it's just like,
yes, which is crazy. It's very, yeah, which is, I mean, that's a whole nother story. There's definitely this white ethnocentric Jesus that has been portrayed through modern Christianity, when in fact, Jesus was not white. He was a man of color. And there's been this sort of patriotic Christian agenda that's been pushed, um, for many generations. And I think there's a lot of young people that are starting to, well, a lot of young Christians that are, you're seeing a lot of young Christians stray away from the church as well, but kind of starting to stand up against that, which is interesting.
I just read two incredible books during quarantine. Isabel Wilkerson's new book called Caste, about how there's a caste system in the US that's not a million miles away from the caste system in India.
Ah,
That's a fantastic book with some incredible history in it. And then I read Noel Ignatiev's book, How the Irish Became White, and how the Irish came to America, and many of them were actually perfectly fine with slavery because suddenly there was a class underneath them. And if
mhm.
that class underneath them were freed, they would be competing with them for low skilled jobs. So they actually protested and rioted sometimes, to keep slavery or Jim Crow later in place. Two incredible books, and this is, people say it's civil rights history, it's African American history. This is American history. This is basic, serious facts about
Oh
American
yeah.
history that so many white Americans either don't know or aren't willing to acknowledge. It's that's been one of the big shocks of moving here. Is I sometimes think that we're taught more about that side of American history than many Americans are.
Oh,
I
that's
was with a
definitely true.
doctor. Right. I was with a doctor end of last year, I think it was, and basically the argument was something like, after slavery ended, there may have been a few problems, but things have been fine for like the last 60 to 80 years. Actually, she went back further than that. And I said something like, "What about Jim Crow?" And she said, "Who was Jim Crow?"
Oh my gosh.
um, yeah, a doctor, and I hear
Wow.
things like that all the time. I mean, you hear prominent so-called intellectuals saying that the white male is the most persecuted group in the US now. It's
Yeah, that's
just
crazy.
insane that, yeah.
Well, it's yeah, I mean, especially like growing up too, like you're especially in a Christian I went to a Christian school as well, and we were taught it was very much so in this order. It was like slavery, then a little bit of Jim Crow, then Martin Luther King Jr., and everything's fine now. So
Right,
it's yeah,
right.
so it's not there's a
I mean,
secret.
it's hard to believe now, but when Obama first got elected, there were people saying America is now a post-racial country. I mean, incredible
Yeah.
to think that people could have actually believed that now. But as far as I can remember, and obviously I was in England at the time, but I do remember people saying that.
Well, Trump is almost the perfect storm because it Obama had a great run, and then it's almost like this white supremacist leader comes back up and is trying to remind African Americans, no, no, remember that you're not meant for the office. Like, remember, the white supremacist agenda is still here, and you don't have the
Yeah,
power that you think that you have,
yeah.
which is scary. What are your thoughts on? You've been following Trump's COVID and everything like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was frustrated in the presidential debate and the vice presidential debate because Pence and Trump were basically saying we did a great job, and it would have been much worse had they been in power. And I wish Biden or Harris would have just said, okay, look into that camera, tell the American people you did a great job, and you're really proud of the way you handled this, because surely nobody believes that. Surely.
Yeah, no, not at
I
all.
mean, even if you're not a facts, stats, graphs person, surely you don't believe that they handle this well. Although
Yeah.
saying that Trump is, he said it last night. He said, "I've done more than any other president apart from Lincoln for African Americans." And if you look at the data, he benefited from the end of a curve that was started after the recovery under Obama and Biden. That uptick in black unemployment, for example, but the economy and other numbers just continued and actually slowed down slightly under Trump. But it was just basically the continuation of what had been happening since after the financial crisis in 2008. And plenty of people, I've got black friends in England who have sent me that graph of just black unemployment, for example, under Trump. And I'm saying, yeah, but what about all of the years that preceded it? Like it's just a continuation of policies that started long before Trump even started running for president.
Well, yeah,
Um,
Pence and Trump are always flipping things too. Like they're never taking responsibility for their own actions, and they're always flipping it. Like, Pence was like, well, the Obama administration, their handling of the swine flu was very bad, and we learned from
Yeah.
that. So it was like, yeah, it's a very gosh. How's Boris Johnson doing these days?
I was just listening to the UK news before I came on here, and the UK is going back into a very serious lockdown, and people are trying to make sense of the new rules, and they can't make sense of the new rules. I mean, they're all over the place. So, I mean, I'm not a Boris Johnson fan at all. I don't think he's anywhere near as smart as people believe he is, and I
Uh-huh.
just don't think I've never seen him take any issue seriously, including the job that he supposedly wanted his entire life. So it doesn't surprise me at all that this is happening today. And also, it looks like the Brexit negotiations are possibly about to break down as well. I just think he's a deeply unserious man who really doesn't care anywhere near enough to put in the work that a prime minister needs to put in.
Hmm. That's interesting. I recently, sorry, this just reminded me. I'm kind of jumping all over here, but it just reminded me. I recently watched your when you were in Rio, um, and what was it was really fascinating. Was that wasn't in December, was it? December 2019?
I honestly can't remember.
Because it was last year, right?
Was it last year? I've got a feeling it was March last year, but I may be maybe it was in March the previous year. I mean, obviously, this
Oh,
is the
really?
problem.
Okay.
There are so many trips.
Okay.
Sometimes trips without even coming home in between.
Are you already
That I
planning
forget.
your next trip, or has it been halted because of COVID and that kind of thing?
No, I found out yesterday what my next project is going to be, and I can't say anything about it yet. But
Okay.
it's largely historical, which I haven't done before. It's covering things that happened in Iraq during the fight against ISIS. I can't
That's
say any more than
fascinating.
that, but yeah, that's the next big project.
What I was curious, um, what you would say about this. How is coronavirus affecting a lot of these countries that you've been to? Do you know? Are they? Is it? Are like especially like refugee camps? Like what's going on? Is it spreading
Um,
rapidly?
I thought it would spread rapidly in Afghanistan, Pakistan, a few places I've been to in Africa. Africa in general has done a fantastic job. I mean, I think they've obviously experienced Ebola not that long ago. I don't think you have people there saying you should deny the obvious science right in front of our noses.
Uh,
So I think they just took it seriously straight away, did the right thing straight away. And as far as I'm aware, there haven't been mass outbreaks like there have been here and in some parts of Europe, for example, because you don't have this movement claiming it's all a hoax for some bizarre reason. Um, Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, we just don't know yet because there isn't the testing, but it doesn't seem to be for some reason as bad as we'd all thought. And that's incredible because a lot of people in those countries, for example, can't socially distance, can't wash their
yeah.
hands, 20 times a day, um, don't have access to masks like we do. So I was terrified for those countries, but so far, touch wood, things haven't been as bad as some people predicted.
And it is truly baffling because white upper class families all over America, like Republican families, are very much so not socially distancing. They're very much so not taking precautions, not wearing masks. Like, did you see Trump's rally recently in Florida?
Yeah, but I have to say, I live in Brooklyn, and I mean, literally, I can see the massive Hasidic neighborhood from my apartment, and they're having mass gatherings right now with no masks or social distancing whatsoever, and there's an outbreak happening right here, right now.
Really?
So it's not just Florida; it's all over the place, and I mean, there are places here where you can to open, they had to sell food. So
Yeah.
you could buy like a carrot for 25 cents. And that allowed you to then drink in that place all night long. So there are places here where people are crowding around outside, admittedly, but crowding around outside a bar or a restaurant. No masks, no social distancing. Obviously, they become even less disciplined as they become more drunk. And I mean, I think I read a brilliant piece the other day. I forget the name of the author. It was in the Atlantic, and it was called "The Third Wave is Already Here." And I think
Hmm.
only one state, and that was Maine, is really going in the direction that it should be going in. All the rest have got very worrying signs about upticks in cases, especially as the weather gets colder and the air gets drier and the droplets can move around in the air more freely.
Yeah, my dad is he grew up in Canada, and he's been doing, since quarantine started, he's been doing like these weekly FaceTimes with his Canadian friends, and they all still live in Canada. But it's interesting. Like they're all like, what is going on in the U.S.? Like, what do your friends back home say? Like, are they texting you like what's going on? Like, why is no one abiding by any of the
I mean,
guidelines?
I hate to say it, but it's not that surprising these days. I mean,
Yeah.
who
No.
thought
Yeah.
Trump was going to become president?
Yeah.
Nobody,
Mm.
almost nobody.
Um.
Even when it was just between Trump and Hillary, most people didn't think he was going to become president, let alone in those early days.
Yeah. I don't want to keep you. I don't want to keep you for too long, but I did have a few more questions that I just wanted to
Yeah,
pick
go
your
for
brain.
it.
I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit more. You said that, was it one of your heroes who got you started in war journalism? War journalism was Seymour Hersh.
Yeah, he wasn't one of the main ones, but I read his My Lai book. I read some other things and absolutely loved them. Yeah, but he's been one of the ones that have said some very dubious things about Syria recently.
Uh huh. Well, so what kind of got you into like fascinated, especially in the area of war journalism? Was there someone specifically, or was it just a series of events that unfolded that way?
Um, I mean, another one who said some really crazy things about Syria recently is John Pilger.
Hmm.
When I was a kid, so this would be late 80s, 1990-ish, he did a few documentaries about East Timor, about Palestine. I just, as soon as I knew that there were not only people suffering so badly in other parts of the world, but also that very often we, as in the UK at that time, were complicit in that suffering. I just couldn't believe it wasn't front page news. I couldn't believe it wasn't part of the daily conversation that everyone was having. I didn't understand how, just because it was over there and the people were slightly different, slightly different color to us or a slightly different culture. I didn't understand how people could just switch off. Um, and that sense stays with me today. I mean, and clearly I'm out of step with most of the population, but it was just learning about how bad things were, often as a result of my country's policies,
Yeah.
that really really set me off. And it's, I mean, I read these long New Yorker profiles of chefs or writers or architects or whatever, and I love them. But it would be very hard for me to imagine spending 3 or 6 months of my life doing a similar profile. Once you care about people suffering so much, and it really is a sort of a feeling of rooting for the underdog, because there are so many examples of people with so little power being crushed by those with so much power. It's very hard to think that anything else, any other subject, is anywhere near as important or urgent.
Well, you definitely have that empathy piece of, there's definitely a passionate for being compassionate to people. And also, I feel like your experiences, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like they really have, and they probably have made you more empathetic to what other people are going through. And then also, um, I guess more, just more like, I know you talked about this with Rogan a little bit, but it was just really fascinating. Like when he said, when you would come back to, America, and, like you're seeing people complaining about, like their Dunkin' Donuts order or something. Does that do some, is that a trigger for you ever? Like you're like, I just came back from, this place and someone's complaining about, their venti latte or something.
It is, but I've got to be honest, and I'm capable of doing that as well.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I was what was I doing? Oh, I was trying to sort out my phone contract the other day on the phone. But tried
Uh-huh.
to do it on the instant chat to begin with,
Yeah.
clearly talking to a computer. Then finally got a human being, and I was losing my mind. And I was just thinking, you are becoming that asshole who treats people badly. And I even said to the person after a while, I said, look, I'm sorry, I know this isn't your fault, but come on, this is insane. Like, you've just charged me $300
Yeah.
for nothing. And I'm not even getting the thing that you're supposed to have given me. And I was becoming so annoyed and uptight. And maybe it comes from, we have everything
Yeah. We
compared to
really
most
do.
of the rest of the world.
Yeah.
This could be paradise. And we really should walk out of our front doors and go, hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Great coffee down there, great bread down there, amazing. It's like we've got
Yeah.
so much compared to most of the rest of the world, and yet somehow we find ways to still fuck it up and still, clash all the time. And it just feels so unnecessary, because we've all got things that many of the people I know from the countries I go to would kill to. I'm sorry, that's a bad phrase. Would give anything to have,
Right. Yeah.
and it's not enough.
Yeah, I mean, and this is coming from a perspective of, I've definitely been privileged, and I'm grateful enough to like um grow up in a nice area with a nice school district, um and there's so many resources that sometimes I overlook. And I think this is everyone too, because of how complex we are, but I definitely tend to overlook the things that I have access to. I mean, I heard someone say, and obviously America has so many problems, and there's so much racial injustice, economic inequality, access to healthcare. Of course, there's tons of issues, but then there's also an aspect of being born in the United States is even if you're born into a certain level of poverty, that level of poverty, and I'm not undermining anyone's experience, and I'm not undermining the level of poverty that so many people go through, some very hard things that I can't even imagine. But there is a certain level of poverty that is different than other countries in the world. Like we're not a third world country. We're not even a second world country. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And sorry, what I said before, I didn't mean that, like there are people I'm sure within a mile of me right now who are having horrific lives,
For sure.
abusive partners or fathers, or. But I just, as a society, I mean, why doesn't America have healthcare for everybody? That's insane.
That's insane. And yeah,
Insane.
and it's crazy. See, that's crazy too. And then it's crazy to see like Trump's reaction after he's given that medication. He's somehow um for social health, not for social health care, but he's he's like, we're gonna get this medication free for every hospital. We're gonna get this to you, when like his policies don't reflect a democratic socialist
I mean, that they
policy
were
standpoint.
trying to overturn the Affordable Care Act on the same day. He was doing that in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and that's also so scary, because getting healthcare is hard enough for so many people, and if overturning the Affordable Care Act, so many people are gonna lose access to healthcare.
I
Even
mean, the inequality here is shocking, but the idea that someone can go bankrupt because of an illness that a family member gets, and this happens to hundreds of thousands of people every
yeah,
year, is insane. And at the same time, I'm lucky. I've got health insurance through my employer, but I've been very sick a few times abroad and come back here, and it's a racket. I mean, I mean, there was one case where I was in Cedar Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, and I clearly had some kind of nasty stomach infection.
mhm.
And um, someone I know called a very good doctor, and he diagnosed me over the phone in like 10 minutes, because of where I'd been, because of the symptoms. This hospital were testing my lungs, my veins, MRI scan. I was in the hospital for 4 days on a drip, eating jelly for 4 days. The
Wow.
bill was $72,000,
Oh my god.
because they knew insurance were going to pay for it, and both sides are making money out of that, so no one's going to complain. And meanwhile, someone else could go bankrupt for a routine medical procedure which cost them $15,000, $20,000. It's obscene, really obscene.
It's absolutely insane, and the fact that so many people, and unfortunately so many corrupt politicians, don't view healthcare as a human right is unfathomable to me, especially. Like, it's just, yeah, it's absolutely absurd. Have you gotten pretty sick before coming back? Like, have you gotten like some
Yeah,
pretty
loads of times. Yeah, I mean, I've giardia, shigellosis, shingles.
Oh my gosh.
um yeah, all sorts. Yeah.
Because it's not exactly like you're staying in five-star hotels or anything.
I mean, a lot of the time there are no hotels. A lot of
Yeah,
the time,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I was talking to someone the other day, and they were asking what's the longest I've been without a bed or a shower, and I think the longest was 2 months in Afghanistan,
Oh my gosh.
with no shower, no toilet, nowhere to, like, we're literally just sleeping on the floor of a bombed out building, and then running from building to building each day and night. And yeah, no hotels of any kind, let alone 5-star hotels.
Well, and I imagine you don't get much sleep over there either. Like, are you pretty much on fight or flight mode the whole
It's
time?
amazing. I mean, that actually, another trip to Afghanistan. We had I was with a group of Marines who were taking the town of Marja, which was with them one of the biggest districts controlled by the Taliban. And they were dropped by helicopter into this town at 4 a.m. on the first day of this operation. So very little sleep, in fact, no sleep that night. Then an entire day of really intense fighting. And then got into a building the following night. And I think some people got a bit of sleep, but the Taliban were trying to shell the building and were trying to blow up these propane gas tanks that were next to us. So not much sleep that night either. And then fighting the whole next day. So that was incredible. Because I remember when the first day of fighting ended, we were ambushed. One Marine was killed and one was very badly wounded. That ambush lasted about 7 hours. We ran into something like a stable. It was literally just three concrete walls or 3 mud walls and nothing else. And as soon as we sat down, we actually had 3 walls around us, giving us some kind of protection. Everyone just collapsed. It was like we were being gassed. Everyone just fell asleep in an instant. It was incredible to see.
That is, I mean, I was blown away when you were telling that story about, and this also, I guess, kind of what we talked about earlier about the severe PTSD that you had, and you still have some, but when you were saying how there was a suicide bomber coming and you were in a house with an IED or something, and it was just you and your cameraman, and it was something along the lines of like your cameraman asked you like, how are you feeling right now, Ben? And you were like, I'm bored out of my mind.
He didn't ask me how I was feeling. He just like the next day, I think it was, just said, we were in a really bad situation and you looked bored. And he said something is wrong if you looked bored. And I remember I really did feel like, oh God, we've got to sit down and wait. And there wasn't even anything to get to. It was just more of the same where we were going. But he's Javier Manzano. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer. Covered Syria for the best part of 5 years. He was a really good guy to have with me and to know. And thank goodness he said something, because he was one of the ones that made me actually go and talk to somebody when I got back.
And you've won an award too, right? Haven't you won Foreign Film Award or something like that? Some sort of award?
Foreign Press Award.
Foreign Press Award.
That was ages ago. The series I work on has won a couple of Emmys.
That's right. I knew that. That's amazing.
The Frontline Club Award is one I'm really proud of. And Harold Evans, the legendary editor of the Sunday Times, who gave Don McCullen all of his amazing work, gave the award. But unfortunately, I was in Pakistan, so I couldn't actually receive it. But he just died earlier this year, but a legendary newspaperman.
Oh,
yeah.
Man. I'm sorry to hear that.
But the Frontline Club if you go to the Frontline Club in London, there's a wall of names of winners of the Frontline Club, and there are some incredible names on that wall. So that one was a fantastic one to win.
That is, and didn't you spend some time with John Oliver too?
I've met him 3 or 4 times because we grew up in the same town in England, like a crappy small town about 25 miles north of London. So I've met him a few times here and there. But yeah, we actually met at the post Emmys party where he had won like 4 or 5 Emmys, as he does every year. And he said, like, it means nothing. It means nothing whatsoever. And I said, no, you're doing some of the best journalism on TV.
Yeah.
And I love the way that he's like, it's like he's landed from another planet. And he's just looked around and thought, hang on a minute, this over here that no one is looking at is a really important story.
Yeah.
And we need to go deep on it and get here. And he does it almost every week. I think he's fantastic.
I mean, emphasizing those issues that are not highlighted in mainstream media is, and I don't know how I sort of got fascinated in it, but I think I mentioned this to you on the phone one time, but it's something that really, and some of the titles of these little Vice documentaries too, are also very fascinating. That really drew me in as a high school kid. And I remember one of the first ones that I saw was Uganda's moonshine epidemic. And I was like, what is that?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. What is that?
Have you seen there's a Twitter spoof account where they come up with spoof Vice titles?
Oh, no, I haven't seen that. That's funny.
Oh, it's very good. Yeah.
I gotta, Ben, on a little bit of a lighter note, do you have any idea what this podcast is called?
No.
It's called Dick Kid Saves the World.
Say the first word again.
It's called Dick Kid Saves the World. My name is Jamie Dick, and my stage name is Dick Kid. So most of the stuff that I do, this is like way more serious, because I'm a huge fan of you. But most of the stuff that I've done, the videos that I make, are very much so like very odd. They're mostly comedy. It's like short skits, like it's like, or I'm interviewing like in character or something like that. But so this is definitely very different from what I normally do, but I really am super fascinated by what you do. So but
Oh,
it's really
thank you.
exciting. But yeah, well, I don't want to keep up too much of your time, but I do want to say this. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your, you're definitely an inspiration to a lot of people like myself. Your humility. And I said this again on the phone, but you would think someone who is doing this type of work would become sort of this like hardness over time or like this sort of toughness, but I feel like you have this genuine desire to, be real, vulnerable, and empathetic with other people. And I'm definitely drawn to that. I'm super inspired by that. So I just want to thank you for um coming on to that. And is there anything that we can, that you can say that we can be looking for um in the next couple months that you're allowed to say some of your work
No,
or
the thing I'm starting now won't be out until probably summer of next year, and then I'm doing a series now with a good friend of mine called Giles Dooley, and he has an
okay.
Instagram account called the One Armed Chef.
Oh
He was
wow.
blown up in Afghanistan and lost both of his legs and an arm.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And during his rehabilitation, I mean, I think he already was before, but became an amazing chef. I mean, if you see his pictures, you'd think it was a Michelin star Italian chef. He's incredible. And we're doing a travel series with him. He just came back from Lebanon. He's going to Scotland soon. I mean, people are making the Anthony Bourdain comparison very often, but he's a fantastic inspirational character. He's got a brilliant way with people, and he's got this approach where he turns up and they see a white guy with a camera and, oh, you want to take my picture, you want to hear the story of the worst day of my life. And he says, no, I want you to teach me how to cook your favorite meal.
Wow.
So they do this shopping, cooking, eating, like marathon. And then maybe he comes back and takes their picture the next day. And in some cases, he builds relationships that last for years. And he's sponsoring some Syrian refugee families in Lebanon. He's an incredible, incredible guy. And we're just about to start filming the third episode of that. It's going to be called The One Armed Chef. Look him up on Instagram, but I think that's going to be a great, great watch.
That's really cool. Okay, I got to see that. All right, my last question, then I'll let you go. Is on a lighthearted note, what is maybe the oddest thing that you have eaten throughout your
Oh,
travels?
there's been a few things. Fried tarantula in Cambodia.
Wow, fried tarantula. That's crazy. What was
And
that like?
I was hoping it was going to like not look like tarantula by the time it got to my plate. But you buy it's like a bag of chips. You buy a bag of chips, but it's a plastic bag with a slight branch in it with
Uh,
3 or 4 live tarantulas, and one of them actually crawled up my arm. And then you
oh my
take it into
gosh.
this tiny little kitchen, and the chef put it in a frying pan with some seasoning for 20 seconds, then put it on a plate and said, "There you go."
How'd it taste?
And the guy was with, who'd survived Khmer Rouge atrocities, incredible guy, ate his and loved it and was delighted. And now you go, now you go. And I couldn't say no. And I knew that if
Uh-huh.
I just like bit a little bit of a leg, it would not be enough and be offensive. So I bit into the body of this tarantula. Sometimes if you eat a shrimp and like the juice squirts across
Oh
inside
no,
your mouth,
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it was like that. And I just grabbed a can of Coke straight away and down. It was disgusting.
It was like a bubble, like you're
Um,
biting into a bubble and it like pops kind of.
yeah, it was. And the hair was still on it, and it
So it
was
wasn't it
hideous.
wasn't good.
It wasn't good at all. No, and I hated it. So that's probably the weirdest thing I've eaten.
Okay, well that is unbelievable. Shoot, well, Ben, thank you so much for coming on. I'm super grateful, and I'd love to keep in touch and see how you're doing. You're a super interesting guy, and I don't think there's many people that have you know quite done exactly what you've done throughout your life. So pretty impressive.
Thank you. That's very good of you to say. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
See you
Thank
soon.
you.